Welcome to Relation Tales. Please like this video and subscribe Relation Tales. Let's begin. The first rays of dawn filtered softly through the lace curtains in Oliver and Maryanne's kitchen, lending a warm glow to the rustic space. Oliver stood at the stove, his hands moving rhythmically as he whisked eggs in a bowl. The clinking of the whisk against the ceramic bowl seemed to echo the calm, yet bittersweet melody he hummed, a tune he'd long associated with quiet mornings spent with Maryanne. 45 years of marriage had imbued every moment of their life together with shared routines, and today was no exception. Today was a milestone, their anniversary. Oliver had planned a special day, as he did every year, not because Maryanne expected it, but because he cherished these acts of love. His devotion showed in the small things: the perfect slice of toast, her favorite orange marmalade waiting on the table, and the steaming mug of tea prepared just the way she liked it. When Maryanne finally stepped into the kitchen, there was something different about her. She greeted him with her usual kiss on the cheek, but her warmth felt distant, as though her thoughts were far away. Oliver noticed immediately. Her gaze didn't meet his, and her smile, though present, was faintly strained. For a moment, he attributed it to the pressures of her consulting work. Lately, she'd been busier than ever, often leaving early and returning late. He pushed the unease to the back of his mind, determined not to let it taint their special day. Over breakfast, he gently tried to share his plans for the evening, a quiet dinner at a quaint French bistro they'd once visited on their honeymoon. Maryanne listened, nodding in polite agreement, but there was an unusual hesitation when she spoke. "Oliver," she began, her tone apologetic yet resolute, "I forgot to tell you. There's a work dinner tonight, something I can't miss." The word stung, though Oliver masked his disappointment with a smile. "It's all right, sweetheart," he replied, his voice steady. "We can celebrate this weekend instead." He offered her a reassuring look, but the seed of doubt had already been planted. There was something in her tone, a flicker of unease that he couldn't shake. As Maryanne left the table to prepare for her day, Oliver sat in silence, the remnants of their breakfast untouched. The house felt unusually quiet, and for the first time in years, that silence unsettled him. He tried to remind himself that marriages were built on trust and understanding, but the subtle changes in Maryanne's behavior were becoming too frequent to ignore. Upstairs, in front of the mirror, Maryanne adjusted the necklace Oliver had given her on their last anniversary. Her reflection stared back at her, a mix of beauty and turmoil. She hadn't lied about the dinner, but it wasn't the kind of work event Oliver imagined. The truth was more complicated, more dangerous. A name echoed in her mind: Samuel. He was younger, vibrant, and intoxicating in a way that unsettled her, yet made her feel alive. Maryanne's affair had started innocently, or so she had convinced herself at the beginning. But now, she found herself entangled in something that was far from innocent. As she exchanged a flurry of texts with Samuel, her heart raced with a mixture of anticipation and guilt. She told herself each encounter would be the last, yet each time she returned to him. Samuel represented a world of passion she thought she'd lost, and despite the creeping guilt, she couldn't bring herself to walk away. When she returned downstairs, Oliver had already tidied up the kitchen. He greeted her warmly, but his smile didn't reach his eyes. Maryanne kissed him on the cheek before leaving, her promise to make it up to him hanging in the air like an empty gesture. As the door closed behind her, Oliver lingered, staring at the space she had just occupied. Something gnawed at him, a dissonance he couldn't ignore. He decided to visit Margot, his sister-in-law. Margot had always been a source of wisdom and comfort, especially after her husband passed away. That evening, he needed her insight more than ever. Meanwhile, Maryanne's day unfolded with a different rhythm. She left the house, but didn't head straight to work. Instead, she drove to a small boutique hotel on the edge of town. Her pulse quickened as she parked and texted Samuel to let him know she had arrived. When she stepped into the lobby, he was already waiting, his confident smile drawing her in. Their time together was thrilling and reckless, a sharp contrast to the steady, predictable love she shared with Oliver. Back at home, Oliver spent the afternoon lost in thought. Memories of their early days played in his mind like an old film reel. Their whirlwind romance, the laughter that used to fill the house, and the quiet moments of comfort they had shared. He couldn't pinpoint when the distance between them began, but now it felt like a chasm. He found himself wondering if there was something he had missed, a warning sign he had ignored. That evening, while Maryanne reveled in the intoxicating thrill of her secret life, Oliver sat with Margot, confiding his growing unease. She listened carefully, her brow furrowing as he recounted Maryanne's behavior. "Do you think she's hiding something?" Oliver asked, his voice hesitant. Margot hesitated before answering. "Oliver, I don't want to jump to conclusions, but you deserve honesty. If you feel something's off, maybe you should trust your instincts." Her words lingered long after Oliver left. Alone in the house that night, he found himself searching for answers in the smallest of things. The way Maryanne's perfume lingered on the air, the faint traces of unease in her recent texts. He wanted to believe in the woman he had loved for decades, but the growing shadow of doubt was impossible to ignore. Maryanne returned home late, slipping quietly into the bedroom where Oliver feigned sleep. She stared at his peaceful face, guilt gnawing at her as she prepared for bed. For all the passion Samuel ignited in her, she couldn't escape the ache of betraying the man who had been her partner for so many years. The days that followed were a delicate dance of deception and suspicion. Oliver became more observant, piecing together fragments of Maryanne's altered routine. Maryanne, in turn, grew more careful, knowing that her double life was teetering on the brink of discovery. As the days turned into weeks, Oliver became increasingly preoccupied with Maryanne's subtle shifts in behavior. She had always been meticulous in her habits, yet now there were inconsistencies he couldn't ignore. Her late nights at work stretched longer, and her excuses felt more rehearsed than genuine. Even the way she dressed seemed different, sleek and polished in a way that hadn't been her style for years. Oliver tried to rationalize these changes. Perhaps she was simply rejuvenating her sense of self. After all, their lives had fallen into a rhythm of predictability that even he occasionally found stifling. Yet, a voice inside him urged caution, whispering that this was not merely a midlife refresh. One evening, as he sat alone at the kitchen table with a glass of wine, Oliver decided he could no longer keep his suspicions to himself. He picked up the phone and called Margot again, needing her steady presence to guide him through his confusion. "Oliver," Margot said gently, her voice filled with concern. "Have you spoken to Maryanne directly? You won't find peace until you do." "I know, Margot," he replied, rubbing his temples. "But I'm afraid of what she might say. What if I'm wrong and I ruin everything by doubting her? And what if you're right?" Margot countered. "Isn't it better to know the truth, even if it hurts?" Her words struck a chord. That night, as Maryanne arrived home, Oliver resolved to confront her. But when she walked through the door, her expression was brighter than usual, and she kissed him on the cheek with a warmth that momentarily disarmed him. He hesitated, unwilling to shatter the fragile sense of normalcy that her presence brought. Instead, he murmured, "How was work?" and let the matter drop for another night. Maryanne, on the other hand, was grappling with her own internal battle. The thrill of her affair with Samuel had dulled slightly, replaced by an undercurrent of guilt that grew stronger each time she looked into Oliver's trusting eyes. Yet, she couldn't seem to let go of the intoxicating freedom Samuel offered, a reminder of the woman she had been before the responsibilities of marriage and family had settled in. Samuel, ever the charmer, seemed unfazed by her moments of hesitation. "You think too much," he would say, brushing her doubts aside with a confident smile. His carefree attitude was part of what had drawn her to him, but it was also what kept her anchored in the dangerous game they were playing. One afternoon, Maryanne sat in her car outside a cafe where she had agreed to meet Samuel. Her phone buzzed with a message from him. "Running late, but I'll be there soon." As she waited, her mind wandered to Oliver. She imagined him at home, perhaps tending to the garden or reading one of his favorite history books. The image filled her with a pang of longing, something she hadn't expected. For all the excitement Samuel brought to her life, it was Oliver who represented stability, kindness, and a love that had weathered decades. The contrast between the two men left her feeling unmoored. When Samuel finally arrived, his easy smile and confident stride momentarily banished her doubts. They spent the afternoon lost in conversation and stolen glances, yet Maryanne couldn't shake the feeling that her two worlds were edging closer to collision. Meanwhile, Oliver began quietly observing Maryanne's actions more closely. One evening, as she left for yet another work dinner, he decided to take a step he had been avoiding. He reached for her laptop, telling himself he only wanted to check the calendar app she often used to organize her schedule. But when he opened the device, his curiosity led him elsewhere. His heart pounded as he navigated through her emails and messages. At first, there was nothing out of the ordinary: work correspondences, reminders, and casual exchanges with friends. But then he stumbled upon a folder labeled Personal. Inside were messages that stopped him cold. The name Samuel appeared repeatedly, the tone of the messages unmistakably intimate. A cold wave of realization swept over Oliver. He read enough to confirm his worst fears, but stopped short of delving deeper. The betrayal was already glaring, and he didn't need more details to understand what was happening. His hands shook as he closed the laptop and sat in silence, the weight of his discovery pressing down on him. For hours, he wrestled with his emotions: anger, sadness, confusion, and a deep sense of loss. By the time Maryanne returned home, Oliver had composed himself enough to greet her as if nothing had changed. But beneath his calm exterior, his mind was racing with questions. How long had this been going on? Why had she turned away from him? And most importantly, what would he do next? The next morning, Oliver decided to confront Maryanne, but not directly. Instead, he chose a subtler approach, hoping to gauge her reaction. As they sat at breakfast, he mentioned casually, "I ran into an old friend yesterday. We talked about how important trust is in a marriage, how it's the foundation of everything." Maryanne froze for a fraction of a second before forcing a smile. "That's true," she replied, her voice steady but her eyes betraying a flicker of unease. Oliver watched her closely, his suspicions confirmed by her guarded demeanor. The rest of the day passed in a haze for both of them, each preoccupied with their own thoughts. Maryanne wondered if Oliver had started to suspect her, while Oliver debated whether to reveal what he knew or wait for her to come clean. As the weeks unfolded, the tension between them grew. Maryanne found herself increasingly paranoid, interpreting Oliver's every word and action as potential signs of his awareness. Meanwhile, Oliver struggled to decide his next move. Part of him wanted to confront her immediately, but another part wanted to wait to understand the full extent of her betrayal before acting. The turning point came one evening when Oliver, unable to hold back any longer, asked Maryanne directly, "Are you happy with me?" The question was simple, yet it carried an undeniable weight. Maryanne hesitated, her eyes searching his face for clues. "Of course I am," she said finally, but the uncertainty in her voice was clear. Oliver nodded, his expression unreadable. "Good," he said quietly, but his heart felt heavier than ever. The days leading up to their inevitable confrontation were fraught with a thick tension neither Oliver nor Maryanne could ignore. They danced around each other, their conversations polite but devoid of the warmth that had once come so naturally. Maryanne noticed the subtle shift in Oliver's demeanor. His eyes lingered on her a moment longer, his silences felt heavier, and his casual remarks often carried a double meaning that made her pulse quicken with fear. One evening, as she prepared to leave for another rendezvous with Samuel, Oliver stopped her at the door. His voice was calm, almost unnervingly so. "Maryanne," he said, his hand resting lightly on the doorframe, "do you ever feel like we've lost something along the way?" The question caught her off guard. She clutched her purse tighter and offered a strained smile. "What do you mean?" He shrugged, his expression unreadable. "I don't know. Just wondering if we've been taking each other for granted. 45 years is a long time, after all." Her heart raced as she searched for an appropriate response. I think we've just grown comfortable, Oliver. That's not a bad thing, is it?" "No," he replied, his gaze steady. "But comfort shouldn't feel like distance." The words lingered in the air long after she left, filling the quiet house with a sense of impending change. Oliver didn't know what he expected from their brief exchange, but he felt no relief. If anything, her response had only deepened the ache in his chest. That night, while Maryanne was with Samuel, Oliver decided to take another step toward uncovering the truth. He called Margot and asked if he could come over. When he arrived, she greeted him with her usual warmth, but her concern was evident. "You look like you haven't slept in days," she remarked, handing him a cup of tea. I haven't, he admitted. Margot, I need your advice. I know Maryanne is hiding something from me. Margot's face grew serious. What makes you so sure? Oliver hesitated before recounting his discovery of the messages on Maryanne's laptop. He spoke carefully, choosing his words with precision, as though saying them aloud would make the situation more real. Margot listened without interrupting, her expression a mix of sympathy and quiet anger. You need to talk to her, she said firmly when he finished. You can't keep this bottled up. She owes you the truth, Oliver. I know, he said, his voice heavy with resignation. But what if the truth destroys everything? Margot reached across the table and placed her hand over his. Sometimes things have to break before they can be rebuilt. Maryanne, meanwhile, was grappling with her own turmoil. As much as she tried to lose herself in the excitement of her time with Samuel, the guilt was becoming unbearable. That evening, as they sat in a dimly lit restaurant, Samuel leaned in close, his hand resting casually on hers. You're distracted, he said, his tone playful but laced with curiosity. Thinking about your husband? The question sent a jolt through her. Don't be ridiculous, she replied, pulling her hand away. But her tone was sharper than she intended, and Samuel raised an eyebrow. Hey, I'm not judging, he said with a smirk. But you've been on edge lately. Maybe this isn't working for you anymore. Maryanne stared at him, her mind racing. The truth was he wasn't entirely wrong. The thrill of their affair had begun to pale in comparison to the crushing weight of what she stood to lose. Yet, the idea of ending things with Samuel left her feeling hollow. I'm fine, she said finally, forcing a smile. Just tired, that's all. Samuel didn't press further, but the seed of doubt had been planted. As Maryanne drove home later that night, her thoughts were a chaotic mix of regret, longing, and fear. She had always believed she could keep her two worlds separate, but now it felt as though the walls were closing in around her. The following weekend, Oliver decided the time had come to confront Maryanne directly. He prepared himself carefully, rehearsing what he would say and bracing for her reaction. That Saturday morning, as they sat together in the living room, he looked at her and said, Maryanne, there's something we need to talk about. Her heart sank at the gravity in his tone. What is it, Oliver? He hesitated, his hands gripping the armrests of his chair. I've noticed things, Maryanne. Changes in you. Late nights, distant looks, missed moments. And then I found messages. Her breath hitched, and she felt the blood drain from her face. Messages, she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. Oliver nodded, his gaze unwavering. I know about Samuel. The silence that followed was deafening. Maryanne stared at him, her mind scrambling for a response. Denial felt pointless, but the weight of the truth was unbearable. She began, but no words came. Tears welled in her eyes as she dropped her head into her hands. I never meant for this to happen, she whispered. Oliver's voice was calm, but heavy with emotion. But it did happen, Maryanne. Why? After everything we've been through, why? She looked up at him, her face streaked with tears. I don't know, Oliver. I felt lost, invisible. And Samuel, he made me feel alive again. But it was a mistake. A terrible mistake. Oliver stood and walked to the window, staring out at the garden they had tended together for decades. Do you love him? The question hung in the air, and Maryanne shook her head vehemently. No, it was never about love. It was a distraction. He turned to face her, his expression unreadable. Then why didn't you come to me, Maryanne? Why didn't you tell me how you were feeling? I didn't know how, she admitted, her voice breaking. And I was afraid you wouldn't understand. Oliver sighed deeply, his shoulders slumping under the weight of her words. I don't know if I can forgive this, he said quietly. But I need time to think. Maryanne nodded, her tears falling freely now. I'll give you all the time you need, she said, her voice trembling. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. As Oliver left the room, Maryanne sank into the couch, feeling the full weight of her actions. The life they had built together now hung in the balance, and she knew that no matter what happened, things would never be the same. In the days following their confrontation, the house seemed to exist in a strange limbo. Oliver and Maryanne moved through their routines as though on autopilot, speaking only when necessary and avoiding each other's eyes. The silence between them was heavy, filled with words left unsaid and emotions left unchecked. For Oliver, every quiet moment was consumed by a relentless inner dialogue. He replayed their confrontation over and over, trying to make sense of the betrayal. Maryanne's words haunted him. I felt invisible. He couldn't help but wonder if he had somehow failed her, if his love had become so routine that she no longer felt its presence. Yet, as much as he scrutinized his own actions, he couldn't ignore the sting of her choice. She hadn't turned to him. She had turned to someone else. Maryanne, on the other hand, was paralyzed by guilt and regret. She had underestimated the depth of the pain she would cause Oliver and herself. Each time she caught a glimpse of his downcast eyes or heard the weight in his voice, she felt another piece of herself crumble. She knew it wasn't enough to apologize. Words could never erase what she had done, but she didn't know how to bridge the widening chasm between them. One evening, as Oliver sat in his study, staring blankly at the pages of an old book, his phone buzzed. It was a text from Margot. How are you holding up? Do you need to talk? He hesitated before replying. Not tonight. Just trying to sort my thoughts. Margot, ever intuitive, replied. Remember, you don't have to figure it out alone. I'm here. Oliver appreciated her support, but he knew this was something only he and Maryanne could resolve. Still, her reminder that he wasn't entirely alone brought a small measure of comfort. That same night, Maryanne found herself in their bedroom, holding a photo album she hadn't opened in years. As she flipped through the pages, memories came rushing back. Their wedding day, the birth of their children, vacations filled with laughter, and countless moments of quiet joy. She traced her finger over a picture of Oliver, holding their eldest son as a baby, his face radiating pride and love. Tears blurred her vision as she realized just how much she stood to lose. Maryanne knew she had to act. She couldn't let their marriage dissolve into nothingness, not after everything they had built together. But what could she possibly do to repair the damage she had caused? The following morning, Maryanne made her first move. As Oliver sat at the kitchen table sipping his coffee, she approached cautiously, her hands trembling slightly. Oliver, she began, her voice tentative, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, and I know I can't undo what I've done. But I need you to know that I want to try. I want to make this right. If you'll let me. Oliver looked up at her, his expression unreadable. He set his coffee cup down and took a deep breath. Maryanne, I don't know if I'm ready to forgive you. I don't even know if I can. But I do know that I need time to figure out how I feel and what I want. She nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. Take all the time you need, she said softly. I'll wait as long as it takes. In the days that followed, Maryanne worked quietly to show Oliver that she was serious about repairing their relationship. She started by cutting all ties with Samuel, a decision that was both liberating and painful. Samuel didn't take the news well, accusing her of leading him on and wasting his time. But Maryanne stood firm. She knew that the life she wanted was not with Samuel, it was with Oliver. She also began making small gestures to reconnect with her husband, cooking his favorite meals, leaving handwritten notes in his study, and reminiscing about their early days together. At first, Oliver remained distant, unsure if her efforts were genuine or merely an attempt to assuage her guilt. But gradually, he began to see the sincerity in her actions. One evening, as they sat together in the living room, Maryanne hesitantly asked, Do you remember the first time we danced together? Oliver glanced at her, surprised by the question. Of course I do. It was at that awful dive bar your friends dragged us to. She smiled, a hint of warmth returning to her face. You were so nervous. I thought you were going to trip over your own feet. I probably would have, if you hadn't been such a good dancer, he replied, a faint smile tugging at his lips. The memory brought a moment of levity, and for the first time in weeks, the tension between them eased ever so slightly. As the weeks turned into months, Oliver and Maryanne continued to navigate the fragile path toward healing. They sought the help of a therapist who encouraged them to confront their feelings honestly and to rebuild their trust one step at a time. The sessions were difficult and often left them emotionally drained, but they also provided a space for them to understand each other in ways they hadn't before. Oliver learned to express the hurt and anger he had suppressed, while Maryanne opened up about the insecurities and fears that had driven her to seek solace elsewhere. Slowly, they began to rediscover the connection that had once been the foundation of their marriage. One crisp autumn afternoon, as they walked hand in hand through a park near their home, Oliver turned to Maryanne and said, "I don't know if we'll ever be exactly the same as we were before, but I think we can be something new, something stronger." Maryanne looked at him, her eyes filled with hope and gratitude. "I want that more than anything," she said. Their journey was far from over, but for the first time in a long while, they both felt a glimmer of hope for the future. Together, they had faced the darkest chapter of their marriage, and though the scars would remain, they were ready to write a new story, one built on honesty, resilience, and a renewed commitment to each other.